Now so those are the preliminaries. Hearing of the dead, the dead having spiritual actions, they can make dua, performing acts of worship, the dead, as in the hadith, performing karamat, requesting dua by the grave. Now, what did Sheikh Abdul Haq al-Dahlawi now? He's a great scholar of the Indian subcontinent. Now, watch the way how he phrases this. And look how the Salafi movement phrased this. And you see the big difference, inshallah, now. This is how he phrases it. As for seeking help from the deceased other than the Prophet ﷺ and the other prophets, peace be upon them. So this is not about the prophets. This is awliya now, non-prophets. Then it has been denied by many of the jurists, fuqaha, who said, visitation of graves is only for the purposes of dua for the dead, seeking forgiveness for them, and conveying benefit to them in the form of dua and reciting Quran. Seeking help from the deceased was affirmed by the Sufi sheikhs, Allah sanctify their secrets, and some of the jurists. So fuqaha, scholars of Islamic law, he said, many of the scholars of Islamic law said for the awliya, you can't ask them for dua. Some of them did say yes. Sufis said yes, Sufi sheikhs. And obviously these Sufi sheikhs were scholars as well, not just, a random person at Mazar, as you see in some parts of the world. They are people of learning and knowledge. Okay. He breaks it down. He's not saying it's a fiqh issue. Some said permitted, some said not. That's how he presents it, right? As opposed to kufr, shirk. Now, what do Hanafi fiqh books state? A common book which is studied in all the madrasas in Indian subcontinent, UK, Turkey, Azhar in the past, has this in it, which affirms seeking dua from someone who's not a prophet. Where does it come up? It comes up in the chapter of Hajj. It says, when you go and give salam to the Prophet ﷺ, Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, what do you say to Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Umar? You say the following: we make tawassul by means of you, Abu Bakr and Umar, to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, to intercede for us and make dua to our Lord. That's what Imam Shurun Bulali says. That's what all these ulama teach their students, and that's what all these students teach and study as well. So what's happening here is you're asking Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Umar to ask the Prophet ﷺ to make dua. Can you see that? That's what I mentioned in the famous Hanafi book. You don't have to practice it, but what I'm trying to say is, what our scholars try to say is that if this is shirk now, which takes you outside the fold of Islam, which as the Salafi scholars say, then you have a huge, huge problem. And if you accept that, then this is shirk, you still want to argue that it's shirk, then you have to make takfir of these people, which the Salafi scholars have to do based on their classical Wahhabi scholars, which is a separate issue though, I don't want to get diverted into that. But what does it say about the Muslim world then? Shirk is prevalent in the Hanafi madhab, in the Hanafi ulama, all misguided. Hanafi mosques, all the madrasas in the UK have a serious problem with shirk, bid'ah, etc. So that's the Hanafi fiqh book, that's what it states. It's a beginner's text. Ask Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar to make dua. You ask them to ask the Messenger of Allah ﷺ to make dua to Allah for you. You see, that's double tawassul. Some people say it's like a double tawassul, not a single, multiple tawassuls. And this issue was also answered by classical Hanafi scholars. Ibn Shahna said, issue regarding a person who visits one of the deceased Salihin, pious people, and says by the grave of one of them, O Sayyidi Fulan, I seek refuge in you and make tawassul by you that such and such is fulfilled for me. Or says, I seek from you that such and such occurs for me. Or says, O Lord, I ask you by the rank of this person, or by the secret, by his secret or knowledge that you do such and such for me. Are these statements sound or not? Or are some of them sound, are others ugly? Ibn Shahna and Abdul Baqi al-Khazraji al-Hanafi quotes this fatwa, and he agrees with it. He answered, the visitation of graves is recommended, with the graves of the pious being more emphasized in desirability. Dua should be made there because this place has a blessing and virtue due to the presence of the righteous person. We covered this in detail last week. Numerous examples of early Muslims who practice this. So this is talking about going to the grave and making dua to Allah by the rank and status of the pious person. Now it goes on. There is no prohibition from making tawassul with the Salihin. For Umar made tawassul with Abbas. Allah be pleased with them both. So Umar asked Abbas to make dua for rain. Okay? And this is not prevented by the death of the righteous person. So he's saying here that Just because somebody's passed away doesn't mean that you can't ask them to make dua for you anymore. Why? This is because death impacts the body. As for the soul, then it is alive. A person still has some kind of life in the next world, as we discussed earlier on. So he's saying it's fine, you can say that. Okay? So he's from those scholars that Sheikh Abdul Haq mentioned who say it's permitted. Okay, Sheikh Abdul Haq said there's a difference of opinion. Permitted. As for the statement, I seek from you that such and such occurs for me, then this is reprehensible, munkar. So the person should not do this. This is a reprehensible matter, for directly seeking is only from Allah Ta'ala, and tawassul to Him with righteous actions and their people, both living and dead, is not condemned, for the blessings of Allah do not cease for them at their death. So the blessing upon a person does not cease at their death. But he's saying there, you shouldn't use the phrase, oh, wali of Allah, give me rizq, give me children. He said this is reprehensible, munkar. The person should be stopped from saying this. Okay? Where he's saying that you can ask them to make dua for you, just as like in a living person, you would go to a pious person and ask them to make dua. So that's a Hanafi fatwa on this from classical Hanafi sources. Once again, you have to make takfir of them as well, and all those who support them and publish their works and back this ruling. And there's many scholars like this. All right, now Shaykh Abdul Haq Dahlawi, then he just kind of wraps up. He just discusses this just to wrap up. So he mentioned, remember, Shaykh Abdul Haq, what did he say? He said there's a difference among scholars. What does he personally say? He himself says, no, you can ask the deceased for help. And he, I believe, experienced this himself, or his teachers experienced this. Shaykh Abdul Haq, he says, as for the seeking of help from the deceased, then some of the jurists have denied it. Now here he says, some of them. Before he said many of them, now he's saying some. Interestingly, okay, just to point that out. If their denial was based on the reason that they, meaning the dead, possess no hearing, no knowledge, no perception of their visitor and their state, then it is established that this is incorrect. So if somebody said you can't ask a dead person for dua because they can't hear you and they cannot do anything, then that's incorrect, because you proved that they can hear you and they do have spiritual actions. Then he goes on to say, if the reason is that they possess no power nor disposal, tasarruf is like a concept where they can make dua which is answered. It's like a spiritual action in that place. They possess no power nor disposal in that place, and that they are prevented from this, busy with that which they have encountered in terms of trials which has preoccupied them from others, then this is not seen as being absolute, especially in the case of the pious who are the awliya of Allah Ta'ala. So he's saying there, somebody might say it's haram to ask the deceased person to make dua, or shirk, because in the next world they're busy with the next world. He said it's possible, but he goes, that doesn't apply to every deceased person. It's not every deceased person is busied in the next world with trials and tribulations. Pious people are not necessarily busied in the next world with trials and tribulations. So even that argument is not valid. He says that's not absolute. It doesn't apply to every deceased person. Then he says, it is possible for their souls to attain in the presence of God a proximity in the barzakh, a station and power to intercede, make dua and seek needs for their visitors who seek intercession by them, just as it will be the case on the Day of Judgment. And what is the evidence to negate this? So he's saying, just at the day of Judgment, the pious can intercede for people, just as in the barzakh, before the Day of Judgment, they can intercede for people as well. That's his argument. He goes on, I do not know what is understood by seeking help, which then denies negate. Because what is this concept of seeking help which people have problem with? That which we understand is that the person in need who makes dua, supplicates to Allah and needs his need from His most high generosity, and makes tawassul by the ruhaniyah, the spirit of this close slave honored by Him, exalted. He says, oh Allah, by the barakah of this slave whom you have mercy on and honored, and by your lutf and generosity, fulfill my need and answer my dua, for you are the most generous giver. So this, I believe, the Salafi scholars will not say shirk, they say it's bid'ah. We covered that in lecture 3, I think, possibly. Lecture 3 we covered it. Okay, all that he calls on this honored slave. So this is the problem now that the Salafi Wahhabi scholars say shirk takes you outside the fold of Islam. Or that he calls on his honored slave who is close to Allah or Ta'ala and says, oh Abdullah, or Wali of Allah, make intercession for me and supplicate to your Lord, make dua to your Lord, and ask Him to grant my request and fulfill my need. The giver and the one asked and hoped in is God and the exalted. And the role of the slave is only as a means, wasila. So here he's saying, the other form is that you ask a deceased person to make dua to Allah for you. And it is only Allah who is the powerful one, the doer, and the one making things happen. And the awliya of Allah are the ones who are annihilated in His power. If this is shirk, asking the deceased person to make dua, if this is shirk and turning to other than Allah, as the denier claims, then you should also forbid tawassul and seeking dua from the salihin, from the slaves and awliya of Allah during their lifetime also. That's the main Sunni point, Sunni ulama's argument. I don't have time to go into it now. I don't have time. We have time to go through it in Ramadan. But that's a contradiction. They say a living person you can ask dua, it's fine. Deceased person who can hear you, can perform karamat, it becomes something that takes you outside the fold of Islam. And our scholars have detailed their discussion to show how it's the argument about the living person is able, his ability that they talk about is deeply contradictory. We don't have time to go through it, but Shaykh Abdul Haq is alluding to the argument. If it's shirk to ask another person, then shirk when they're alive and when they're dead. Either way is shirk. And this is not something which is widespread. This is something which is not something which is forbidden, for it is mustahab and good and widespread in the religion. Meaning that we ask pious people to make dua for us. It's common. Okay, and as I pointed, it's a deeper discussion which our scholars have responded to the Salafi school on the understanding of shirk. If they claim that they have been removed from their state and honoring, or that they had in this world, and that what is the evidence for it? That their pious, their high rank is removed, or that they have been busied with that which is presented to them from difficulties after death, and this is neither absolute, and there is no evidence for it being perpetual and continuous till the day of judgment. The most is that this issue is not absolute. So he's saying here that the dead person being busied is not absolute. It's possible for some, and for others, it doesn't apply to others. Okay? And that's probably the interpretation of those hadith where people are not aware of what their families have done or certain things. Okay? Rather, the evidences are established contradicting this. Yes, if the visitors believe, meaning the visitors believe that the inhabitants of the graves dispose are independent and powerful without turning to God and seeking from Him, as is believed by the ignorant, unlearned, common person, as also they do other than this from kissing graves, prostrating to them, praying towards them, regarding which there is narrated prohibition and warning, then this is forbidden and warned from. So he's saying that, look, if they go and they do incorrect things, that's haram. Kissing graves, asking, thinking that the deceased person is independent, thinking that they can directly give you, this is all haram. It's forbidden. And the common ignorant person, so he's saying the ignorant, unlearned common person, they're forbidden from these things. They are supposed to be warned from this. You can't confuse the two issues. And the actions of the common people are not taken into account at all, and it is outside of the discussion. He says, look, what common people do is separate to what we're discussing here. Just because common people do very, really strange things, as you can see on YouTube now, unfortunately, well, it's proven now, it's on YouTube, the evidence is there. They do all sorts of ridiculous, crazy things. That doesn't change the reality of whether the deceased person can hear, can they make dua for you or not. There's two separate issues. You can't just conflate them. God forbid that a scholar of the sacred law and knowledgeable of rulings of the religion would believe and practice this, meaning doing haram things. So he's saying, do not conflate both issues. You have to be careful. As for that which is reported from the sheikhs who experience spiritual unveilings in terms of seeking help and istimdad from the perfected souls and benefit from them, then they are too numerous to list. And he's saying, look, there's some great ulama who sought help from their shuyukh who passed away, and they found that they helped them. Okay, near the grave and away from the grave. And they're too numerous to list. They are mentioned in their books and one between them, and there is no need to mention them. Perhaps the fanatical denier will not benefit from their word statements. May God protect us from such a matter. If somebody's fanatical, we can't help them, but it's too numerous to list pious, God-fearing people who called on their shaykh or went to a grave and asked the deceased person and they found help. Salafi scholars will probably say it's a shaitan or a jinn. One scholar, God-fearing scholar, who's a scholar of Aqidah, scholar of Islamic law, they know about jinn, they know about shayateen. They know more than many of these Salafi scholars know about them. And they were all duped and misled. Is that what they're seriously saying? That's what they have to say. And they also have to say, obviously, that all these numerous Sufi scholars committed shirk, then they're outside the fold of Islam, Indian subcontinent, kuffar. And we talked about in the first lecture, which, if people can respond to that, inshallah, it talks about that as well in passing, although I think last year we talked about this in detail as well, about the rules of takfir. Anyway, Carrying on, yes, it is transmitted in the Sunnah that when visiting to give the salam to the deceased, seek forgiveness for them, recite Quran, but likewise there is no prohibition from seeking help. Thus the visitation benefit and seeking help all will be dependent on the state of the person visiting and the person visited. This is quite interesting. What he's saying is, look, what he seems to be saying is, not any, just say we establish that it's permitted, okay? You follow those group of scholars who say it's permitted. Even then, not anybody can just seek help from the deceased person. It's based on dependent on the person visiting and the person visited, the person deceased person. It's about their spiritual state as well. So it's not an absolute that anybody can do it, which is quite interesting. He mentions that as well. It's not just mass, you just roll it out en masse to the masses, common person. It's a very, there seems to be a very spiritual aspect to this. Like some people can do this, some can't. Dependent on the person visiting and the person who they are visiting, the deceased person as well. Then know that the differences of opinions regarding other than the prophets. Okay, that's what he mentions. The reason for my discussing this in detail at this point is that to refute the deniers, for they have appeared in our times, so this is 400 years ago in the Indian subcontinent, a small band of people who denied the helping, seeking help and aid from the awliya, that have passed from this ephemeral world to the abode of perpetuity, those who are alive with their Lord, but they perceive it not. They label those who turn to them as mushrikeen, like the idol worshippers. So that's why he discussed it in detail. He said a small group has appeared who are saying this and they're wrong. And he mentions from his scholars and their teachers who, I haven't translated it because it's becoming too lengthy, who sought help from their shuyukh after they passed away. And he's mentioned there's so many incidents of the Sufi ulama that but he's saying there's a small group emerged about 400 years ago. He doesn't mention them by name in our times. So I don't know whether he's talking about the Arab world and whether, because he spent a lot of time in the Arab world, to the point that when his teacher, I believe, sent him back, he didn't want